If you really want to know why the global economy just completely struggles to solve climate change, you honestly shouldn't look at some massive industrial smokestack. You should look at the receipt for a McDonald's Big Mac.
Right. Yeah, because the price tag is arguably the most, well, the most convincing lie in modern commerce.
I love that, the convincing lie.
It really is. We are so conditioned to believe that when we hand over money for a product, that transaction represents the total complete cost of creating that product. But to actually fix massive systemic problems like industrial pollution, we have to look at the huge blind spots that are hiding right in front of us.
Exactly. And, well, welcome to the Deep Dive, everyone. Today we have a very clear mission for you. We are taking the incredibly complex world of environmental microeconomics, and we're breaking down a massive question.
A very massive question.
Right. Why do some environmental policies succeed brilliantly while others just, fall completely flat?
Yeah, and to get there, we are going to examine how governments try to fix the environment through two very specific lenses. So blunt command and control methods versus market-based incentives.
But before we can even evaluate the solutions, we have to kind of diagnose the disease.
Yeah, we need to understand the hidden gears of the economy that make pollution this almost like inevitable byproduct of our daily lives. And it really all comes down to the fundamental difference between the costs we actually see on paper and the costs that just sort of float away into the atmosphere.
Which brings us back to the Big Mac.
Right, the burger.
So when you buy that burger, the price you pay covers all of the private costs involved in making it. You're paying for the beef, the bun, the electricity to run the grill, the wages for the cashier.
Everything's accounted for.
Exactly. The economic loop is completely closed. But then compare that to flipping on a light switch that's powered by a coal plant.
The loop just breaks entirely. I mean, the price you pay on your monthly electric bill absolutely covers the utility company's private costs. So, the literal tons of coal, the plant maintenance, the salaries of the engineers.
Right.
But what it deliberately leaves out is the collateral damage. So the carbon dioxide that's accelerating climate change, sulfur dioxide causing acid rain, the local health issues from smog.
Asthma, things like that.
Exactly. Those are external costs. The utility company doesn't pay them, and they definitely aren't passing that cost to you on your monthly bill.
So the true ultimate cost of that electricity is vastly higher than what the utility company is actually accounting for.
Yeah.
And economists, they frame this with a specific equation, right?
Mm-hmm.
Social cost equals private cost plus external cost.
Yep, that's the one. The social cost is the true heavy burden placed on society to produce a good. And whenever there is a mathematical gap between the private cost the business pays and that total social cost, we have an externality.
An externality. And externalities aren't, universally destructive, are they?
Oh, no, not at all. There are positive externalities woven all throughout the economy. Think about, a college education.
Okay.
When someone earns a degree, they get the private benefit of a higher earning potential, right? But society actually reaps a massive external benefit from that.
Like what?
Well, statistically, college-educated populations correspond with much lower crime rates, which, saves taxpayer money on law enforcement. They also tend to be better informed voters, which theoretically leads to more efficient civic policies. So society profits from that individual's education, even though we didn't pay their tuition.
Okay, we'll gladly take the positive externalities.
Yeah.
But today we are diving into the messy, destructive ones.
The negative ones.
Right, the negative externalities. So, okay, let's unpack this with something a little more relatable. Imagine I open a massive late-night commercial nightclub in a really quiet residential neighborhood.
Oh, your neighbors would love that.
Oh, they'd hate me. But I get the private financial benefit of a packed dance floor, right? And I pay the private costs for the DJ, the bartender, the drinks. But my neighbors are paying a massive external cost.
Right. They lose sleep, their stress levels spike, their property values just plummet.
Exactly. I'm creating a massive negative externality.
And what's fascinating here is how that lack of financial responsibility fundamentally alters your behavior as the club owner, because you are totally insulated from the cost of your neighbor's plummeting property values. You have literally zero financial incentive to turn the base down or, close early.
Yeah, I'm just looking at my profits.
Right. But if you were legally forced to compensate every single neighbor for their lost property value out of your own pocket, You would operate that club very, very differently. You'd probably host fewer parties or install super expensive soundproofing or just move to an industrial zone.
Because right now I'm getting a free ride on their suffering, so I'm like overproducing the music.
Exactly. You're overproducing beyond what's economically efficient. And that psychology translates identically to a massive industrial power plant.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Because the coal plant is entirely insulated from the social cost of the smog it creates, it produces too much electricity way beyond what is economically efficient. The market is effectively flying blind. It's actively rewarding companies for ignoring the damage they cause.
Okay, wait. Let me just, if the market is just chugging along, actively rewarding businesses for producing way too much pollution because it's ignoring these external costs, that isn't just like a minor glitch.
No.
That is a fundamental system failure.
You nailed it.
Yeah.
And economists label this exact phenomenon a market failure. It's a state where the free market, if you just leave it entirely to its own devices, it completely fails to produce an economically efficient outcome because these externalities have totally warped the incentives.
And the underlying cause of this market failure is so fascinating to me. It's not just the classic cliche of, corporate greed. The actual mechanical cause of the failure is incomplete or unenforceable property rights.
Yes. Markets cannot function without boundaries. They absolutely require clear property rights. So the exclusive, legally enforceable right to use, buy, or sell a resource.
Right.
Imagine a large paper mill, right? And they want to discharge chemical pollutants into a nearby lake. If that entire lake is privately owned by just a single individual, that owner has enforceable property rights.
Okay, so they can say no.
Or they can calculate the exact cost of cleaning up that chemical discharge and just charge the paper mill a daily fee for using their lake as a dumping ground.
Oh, I see. So by charging that fee, the lake owner essentially forces the paper mill to internalize the externality.
Exactly.
The pollution cleanup just becomes another line item on the mill's private balance sheet, right next to like buying wood pulp or whatever. The cost is back on the receipt.
The cost is back on the receipt. The market functions perfectly in that specific scenario. But then change just one variable. Suppose the lake is public property owned by the state.
Okay.
Or even more complicated, suppose the pollution isn't liquid going into a lake, but sulfur dioxide traveling hundreds of miles through the atmosphere and landing as acid rain across like 3 different states.
You can't put a physical fence around the atmosphere.
Right. You cannot easily define or enforce property rights on the wind. Without an owner to charge a toll, the polluter just operates for free, the true cost is dumped onto society, and the market officially fails.
So if pollution is a market failure and it causes this much systemic damage, I mean, a logical person looking at this would just say, let's just ban it. All right. Like, should the economically efficient amount of pollution just be absolute zero?
The intuition there completely makes sense, but the reality involves one of the most, honestly, counterintuitive concepts in environmental economics. The optimal level of pollution reduction is virtually never zero.
Wait, really? Why wouldn't we want a world with zero emissions? That sounds like the ultimate goal.
Because of the really ruthless math of marginal benefit and marginal cost. Think about the physical mechanics of cleaning a terribly, terribly messy room.
Okay.
Walking in with a trash bag and just picking up the biggest pieces of garbage, that gives you a massive, immediate visual improvement for very little effort. Your marginal benefit, huge. And your marginal cost is just, a few minutes of walking around.
Right, the easy stuff.
Exactly. But what happens when you want the room perfectly microscopically clean?
It takes forever.
Right. You are eventually on your hands and knees with a tiny toothbrush, scrubbing out individual dust mites from the carpet fibers. The cost in time and agonizing effort becomes totally exponential, but the actual improvement to the room is barely noticeable to anyone walking in.
Ah, so the effort skyrockets while the reward basically flatlines.
Yes. And the industrial reality of pollution control follows that exact same curve. Take sulfur dioxide emissions from a power plant. When a city's air is literally thick with toxic smog, the marginal benefit of capturing the first 1,000,000 tons of sulfur dioxide is astronomically high.
Because people are getting sick.
Right. You're saving local forests, preventing the physical erosion of buildings, and stopping thousands of pediatric asthma attacks. Like, the initial 1970 Clean Air Act dramatically reduced infant mortality rates. The societal return on investment was massive.
So installing a basic filter on a smokestack captures, say, 90% of the soot, and it's relatively cheap to do. But then as you keep demanding cleaner and cleaner air,
The engineering challenges become monumental. Capturing that final 1 or 2% of pollutants doesn't just require a slightly better filter. It often requires completely reinventing the thermodynamic combustion process of the plant itself. Yeah, and the marginal cost to the facility, and by extension, the consumers who actually buy their products, it starts to skyrocket into the billions. Eventually, the financial cost to society of installing that space-age technology vastly outweighs the microscopic health benefit of removing the last few floating particles. The goal of economic policy is maximizing the net benefit to human society, not achieving an absolute pristine zero.
okay, so the market is broken because nobody owns the sky. And we need to reduce pollution significantly, but not all the way to zero. This is where the government has to step in to create boundaries. And the most instinctual, heavy-handed way they do this is through command and control methods.
Command and control. It is exactly what it sounds like. The government bypasses the market entirely and simply imposes strict quantitative limits on the amount of pollution a firm is legally allowed to emit.
Or they mandate specific devices, right?
Exactly. They just mandate that firms must install specific government-approved pollution control technology.
And, I mean, history is full of these brute force regulations. Like back in the 1980s, the government didn't politely ask the auto industry to innovate. They legally commanded that every single new car roll off the assembly line with a catalytic converter.
Right.
Or in 2012, the government implemented strict energy efficiency standards that basically banned the sale of traditional incandescent light bulbs.
Yeah, and we see this approach forming the backbone of major contemporary policy debates, too. The proposed Green New Deal, for example, relies incredibly heavily on command and control architecture.
Right, according to the source material.
Exactly. The legislative framework aims to use administrative rules to completely eliminate carbon emissions in power generation within just a decade. It involves requiring the transition to 100% clean, renewable energy, mandating maximum energy efficiency upgrades for existing buildings, and dictating a complete overhaul of the transportation sector.
And just to be clear, we are simply analyzing the economic mechanisms here completely impartially. Some policymakers argue that a crisis requires this kind of uncompromising, vigorous response. But the sheer scale of a command and control approach at that level is staggering. I mean, estimates suggest the Green New Deal would require an enormous surge in federal spending, potentially $1 trillion or more annually.
Yeah, it fundamentally relies on the government acting as the sort of chief engineer, right? Directing thousands of individual utilities on exactly which technologies they are legally permitted to employ.
But doesn't a rigid rule ignore how different businesses operate? It feels like trying to paint a masterpiece with a roller brush.
That's a great way to put it.
It's like the government mandating that every single citizen must wear a size 9 shoe just because that's the national average.
Yeah.
If you have a massive industrial sector and the government passes a blanket rule demanding every single factory reduce their emissions by exactly 20%, you just create chaos.
Total chaos.
Because factory A might be running 50-year-old equipment. Making a few basic tweaks to hit that 20% reduction might cost them almost nothing. But Factory B might have literally just spent millions modernizing their entire facility. They're already running at peak efficiency. Squeezing another 20% out of their system might require ripping the entire building down to the studs, bankrupting the company in the process.
And this is exactly why economists generally view command and control as this blunt, incredibly expensive instrument. Every individual firm has a wildly different internal cost for reducing pollution. By forcing everyone to adopt the exact same technology or hit the exact same arbitrary limit, the government is just being economically inefficient. It ultimately costs society far more money than necessary to achieve the desired environmental baseline.
So let's talk about the political psychology here for a second. If it's so expensive and blunt, why do politicians love command and control so much?
Well, because of how it plays to the voters.
Right.
When a politician mandates that a massive corporation must use clean energy, it sounds to the average citizen like a free fix.
Oh, like the corporation is paying for it.
Right. The corporation appears to be footing the bill. The reality, of course, is that the corporation simply passes those massive compliance costs straight onto the consumer through higher prices. But the mechanism is totally hidden. Alternative methods, as we'll see, are much more transparent about the cost, which makes them politically toxic.
Okay, so if blunt rules bankrupt efficient companies, the government has to figure out a way to make the companies actually want to fix the problem themselves. How do you force a massive utility to care about the atmosphere without micromanaging their factory floor?
You use a scalpel instead of a hammer. Economists prefer to rewrite the rules of the game so the market naturally corrects its own failure. We call these market-based incentives. Instead of dictating behavior through administrative decrees, you alter the financial reality of the firm.
And the most direct way to alter a firm's financial reality is simply to make them pay the external cost. You tax the damage.
Exactly. These are known as Pigovian taxes, named after the economist Arthur Pigou. In the context of climate change, it takes the form of a carbon tax. So if scientific and economic consensus determines that a utility causes, let's say, $49 worth of environmental and health damage for every single ton of carbon it emits, the government simply levies a tax of $49 per ton.
And that $49 figure is actually highly specific, isn't it?
It is, yeah.
Economists at the U.S. Treasury Department actually calculated that the marginal social cost of carbon dioxide emissions is roughly $49 per metric ton. And to translate that out of a spreadsheet and into our daily lives, a $49 per ton carbon tax would basically raise the price of everyday gasoline by about 44 cents a gallon.
Right. And the brilliance of the tax is what it doesn't do. It doesn't tell a single person what kind of car they are allowed to drive. It doesn't tell a utility what kind of power plant they must build. It simply internalizes the externality.
It puts the price back on the receipt.
Exactly. By adding that 44 cents at the pump, the true social cost is finally visible to the consumer. Consumers suddenly have an organic, built-in financial incentive to carpool, or buy electric vehicles, or demand better public transit.
And the cascading effect on industrial innovation is just massive. The moment a carbon tax hits their balance sheet, energy companies have an existential financial incentive to innovate.
They have to.
They don't need a government mandate to research solar or wind. They will pour billions into research and development. I mean, even exploring fringe technologies like nuclear fusion, just to escape the crushing weight of the tax.
Yeah, but while the economic elegance is undeniable, the political reality is brutal. Carbon taxes face fierce opposition. Energy-intensive sectors, chemical manufacturing, aluminum smelting, heavy agriculture, they argue that a carbon tax drastically inflates their production costs, threatening jobs and economic stability.
Which, again, we are just impartially reporting.
Absolutely. Furthermore, unless a carbon tax is implemented as a unified global standard, it creates a really uneven playing field. U.S. industries paying $49 a ton would face a severe competitive disadvantage against foreign manufacturers operating in countries with no such penalty.
So if taxes are kind of a political third rail, what is the alternative market-based tool?
Well, then we arrive at cap and trade, also known as a system of tradable emissions allowances. And to truly grasp the mechanics of this, we really have to look at the 1990 sulfur dioxide program, which was designed to combat the crisis of acid rain. It remains one of the most staggering environmental policy successes in modern history.
Yeah, so instead of Congress acting like the chief engineer and telling every single power plant in America what kind of smokestack filter to buy, they simply set a boundary. They established a total national cap, declaring that overall sulfur dioxide emissions had to be reduced by 8.5 million tons.
Right.
Then they issued allowances, essentially physical tickets, that legally permitted a utility to emit a specific fraction of that sulfur dioxide.
Setting the cap guarantees the environmental goal. But making those allowances tradable is what truly unleashed the power of the market. Utilities were allowed to buy, sell, and hoard these pollution tickets on an open market, exactly like trading stocks on Wall Street.
Okay, let's walk through the actual mechanics of a trade to see why this is so brilliant. Imagine I am the CEO of an aging, incredibly dirty coal plant in Ohio, and you are the CEO of a modern, highly efficient natural gas plant in Chicago.
Okay, so as the CEO in Chicago, I look at my facility and realize that by making a relatively cheap, say, $100,000 upgrade, I can drop my emissions far below what my government allowances permit. So I now have a stack of leftover, legally valid pollution tickets.
Meanwhile, in Ohio, I am staring at an absolute nightmare. To reduce my emissions to the legal limit, I would have to spend $500,000 to retrofit my ancient boilers.
But then I see you, the Chicago CEO, selling your extra tickets on the open market for, let's say, $250,000.
So what do? I buy your tickets, I save myself $250,000, you make a massive profit, and the total amount of pollution entering the atmosphere is still mathematically capped at the exact level the government demanded.
Exactly. The environmental goal is completely achieved, but the market acted as a sort of supercomputer, automatically sorting out the absolute cheapest, most efficient path to get there. It essentially harnesses the ruthless profit-seeking behavior of corporations and weaponizes it for environmental conservation.
And the financial results were just unbelievable. Before the cap-and-trade program launched, the electric industry panicked, estimating the compliance costs would hit $7.4 billion every single year. But because the trading system incentivized innovation and allowed companies to find the path of least resistance, the actual cost was less than $870 million a year.
Which is incredible. Society saved over $6.5 billion annually while achieving the exact same reduction in acid rain.
But this brings us to a major emotional roadblock. Here's where it gets really interesting. Environmental groups often fiercely oppose cap-and-trade systems.
They do, yeah.
They label these allowances a literal license to pollute. And honestly, on a human level, that anger is entirely understandable. Why should a wealthy polluting factory in a low-income neighborhood be allowed to just stroke a check, buy some tickets from Chicago, and continue spewing chemicals into the local air?
It is a totally valid emotional critique, particularly concerning localized pollution hotspots. However, dismissing the system entirely ignores the foundational economic reality of scarcity and trade-offs.
Expand on that. Like, where does that $6.5 billion in savings actually go?
Well, that capital is finite, right? If the government uses command and control to force your Ohio plant to spend $500,000 on inefficient upgrades just to punish you, that money is destroyed. It can never be used again. But by saving society $6.5 billion a year through trading, those resources are freed up.
Oh, I see.
That capital can be invested into upgrading renewable energy grids, developing new battery technologies, or entirely unrelated societal needs like funding public schools or healthcare infrastructure. On a macro level, the global atmosphere doesn't really care which specific smokestack the reduction comes from, as long as the total global cap is met. Insisting on punishing specific factories at the expense of systemic efficiency ultimately just makes the entire society poorer.
But despite that massive economic triumph in the 90s, the cap-and-trade model hit a brutal reality check.
Yeah.
By 2013, the sulfur dioxide system had essentially collapsed.
Yeah, it did.
As atmospheric science advanced and researchers realized sulfur dioxide was even more dangerous than initially understood, attempts to lower the cap further triggered massive political gridlock and endless court battles. The system completely froze, and the EPA was forced to revert to the old, blunt command and control limits.
And it just proves that an elegant economic theory is entirely useless if it cannot survive the meat grinder of the legal and political system. A policy absolutely must possess both economic efficiency and enduring political willpower.
So we've covered a massive amount of ground today. We dismantled the price tag and found the hidden external costs that cause the free market to actively reward pollution. We explored how the government can step in with the blunt hammer of command and control regulations, which are politically popular but economically devastating.
Right. And we examined the alternative, so market-based incentives like carbon taxes and cap and trade. These tools act as a scalpel, internalizing the external costs and harnessing the market's own greed to find the absolute cheapest path to a cleaner world.
But the root cause of all of this, the reason these market failures happen in the first place,
Yeah.
it leaves us with an incredibly profound challenge. We established that externalities exist because of missing boundaries. The tragedy of the commons occurs because nobody holds the deed to the atmosphere or the oceans. There is no owner to charge a toll.
Yeah, and if the ultimate economic cure to a market failure is establishing clear, enforceable property rights, it forces us to ask a near impossible philosophical question. The carbon we dump into the unowned atmosphere today will primarily impact the generations of humans who haven't even been born yet. They are the true stakeholders in this transaction. But how do you assign property rights to the year 2100? How do you negotiate a fair price with people who do not yet exist to demand compensation?
That is the ultimate blind spot in the market. Who is negotiating for them? It really makes you look at a smokestack and, the receipt for your next burger in a completely different light. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning the hidden forces shaping the world around you.